Chapter 9. June 7, Sup, th/Sup, 1852. I worry for the safety of my wife and the entire wagon train if Mr. Bradford comes back. I know everyone is doing all they can to protect Penelope, but I am not sure she can handle it if he takes her back to Virginia. I am doing all I can to keep her safe, and when I'm not with her, Mary does an admirable job of the same. I am thankful Mary took the time to teach Penelope to shoot a pistol, because I feel like she can protect herself when it is in her apron pocket. As we cross the North Platte River, which to my understanding is the most difficult crossing of the journey, I will be busy helping everyone cross, and I won't be able to be with Penelope as much, which will worry me even more. I have no idea what more I can do, but somehow what I am doing doesn't seem like it's nearly enough. On the way back to their wagon from the dance, Penelope clung to Herb's arm. "I really enjoyed watching you play," she said softly. "I know I've heard you before, and I even watched you play back in Independence, but it was different tonight, knowing you're my husband. I can picture you teaching our little boys how to play the fiddle." "Not the girls? Do you not think girls can learn to play music?" Herb grinned at her. "Stop teasing me," she said, swatting his arm playfully. "I just picture us having a dozen little boys who all look just like you." "That's funny, because I see us having a dozen little girls who look just like you." She smiled. "Let's just agree to have children, and you can teach them to play." "How's that?" "Perfect," he said. "I'm setting up the tent." "Good. I don't think I'd like making love out in the open, and after watching you play, I might have to be willing to try it." Penelope wasn't sure the most polite way to tell him she was ready to make love. He raised an eyebrow at her. "So, you really like watching me play?" "I do. It was fun to see your passion for the music as you moved your hands over your fiddle. I felt like you were playing just for me, even though I knew better. It's hard to explain the connection I felt with you." "Huh. Maybe I should have played the fiddle more before I was married." "You're not getting any husband points." "I'll do better." He kissed her softly. "Putting up the tent, and then we'll sleep." Since she knew the word sleep was just a euphemism for what they were planning to do, she had no complaints. Yes, she would sleep with him. No problem there. Even watching him put the tent up, his muscles flexing under his shirt as he moved the heavy wooden poles, made her blood heat up. Considering she hadn't been sure she even wanted to ever marry a week ago, she was certainly taking to being a wife. His wife. Asterisk. Early on Sunday morning, Herb emerged from the tent he shared with Penelope to find Mr. Bradford sitting on a rock and cooking over their fire. "May I help you?" he asked. He couldn't imagine why the man wouldn't have just stormed in and taken Penelope while he slept. "I'm still looking for this girl, and from what I understand, she's with you. I need to take her back to Virginia." Mr. Bradford held up the portrait of Penelope. "Your wagon was pointed out as where she was staying." As he spoke, Herb saw some of the other men in camp step forward, each of them with a gun drawn. They were ready for him to tell the truth, finally. "I married the girl you're looking for. She's my wife, and her father no longer has any hold over her. I suggest you go right back to Virginia and let him know that." The man shook his head, reaching for the gun at his hip. "I don't recall that being in my instructions." The look Mr. Bradford gave him was menacing. Herb nodded to the men behind the hunter. "I'm afraid you don't have a choice." When Bradford turned, he saw 15 barrels raised against him, and he spit. "You think you've bested me, don't you? I'll be taking that girl back to Virginia if it's the last thing I do." Herb sighed. "If you try again, it really will be the last thing you do." He knew no judge would convict him with so many witnesses. No, people would understand he was doing what he needed to do to protect his wife. Bradford mounted his horse, and as he rode out of camp, he called, "I'll be back." As soon as the man was out of sight, Herb called out, "You can come out now, Penelope. He knows I'm here and that you're married to me. What if you're not safe now?" She couldn't bear the thought of losing Herb. She had finally come to the realization that she was in love with her husband, and now Mr. Bradford wanted to hurt him. She couldn't allow that to happen. Herb shrugged. "I don't particularly care about my own safety. It's yours I'm concerned about." He ran his hands from her shoulders down to her hands. Without another word, Penelope leaned into him and held tight. "I'm scared for both of us. I am too, to be honest with you, but I really don't know what to do about him. I'm going to have another meeting with the other men before church today. We'll come up with a plan to keep you safe." She stepped back, looking up at the man she'd married, knowing that they belonged together. "Could we pay him off?" she asked. It seemed like it would be smart. "With what?" "I'm not a rich man, Penelope." He hated to admit it, knowing what her past had been like, but he didn't have the kind of money it would take to pay the man off. "Not at all. My jewels. I don't care about any of them but the pearls, but I'd get rid of those if it meant you'd be safer," she said softly. "None of them matter as much as you do." "What jewels?" he asked. "I thought you gave them to Mabel before you left the plantation." He certainly hadn't seen any jewels in their wagon. Penelope shook her head. "I gave her one ring. I have more. So many more." She walked to the wagon and pulled out the mostly empty flour bag where her jewelry was hidden at the bottom. "What are you doing?" he asked, frowning. She took the jewelry out, unwrapped it from the velvet she'd used to protect it from the flour, and laid it out for him. "I brought it all to sell to build my dress shop. I don't need any of it." "You can't sell your jewels." He'd never seen as much jewelry as she was showing him, and it made him a little sick to his stomach to realize that had been there without his knowledge. What if he'd thrown the sack away? "I don't know why not. I'll never need it again. I do love the pearls my mother gave me, but nothing else even matters a little bit. So, I want to use it to have Mr. Bradford tell my family I'm dead." Penelope took a deep breath. "Father will just keep sending people until he knows I'm gone. I can't let you use your money. We'll find another way. I can't let you risk your life for me." "This is the best way," she said softly. "It would take one necklace, and he'd do as we asked. We'd still have so many others. The only thing I care about are the pearls my mother gave me when I turned 16, because they belonged to her mother and her mother before her. I want to put them around the neck of my daughter when she turns 16. It's the only thing I'm sentimental about at all." She shrugged. "The rest are just possessions I brought along to sell when I need money." Bob walked over from the wagon parked beside them. "I think she has a really good point. If we want to get rid of Bradford with no bloodshed, this is the answer." Herb hated the idea with everything inside him. He wanted to be able to provide for his wife, and that meant paying off the man who was trying to kill her. "We'll talk to the others and see what everyone has to say about it," he finally said. Penelope waited until he'd gone off with the other men before starting breakfast. Mary came over and talked to her. "I wish that man would go away and stay away." "We all do." Penelope shook her head. "I wonder how he knew that I was in camp and with Herb. Someone must have told him. I don't want to think badly of anyone in our company, so I don't want to say who I think it is. No, we'll just move on as we can." Herb sighed. "I don't like this situation one bit." Penelope sighed. "I just want him gone, so I can be happy. I found the man I want to spend the rest of my life with. This ridiculously long journey of ours is keeping us from our dream, but that man will not. He needs to go away, and if it takes a necklace, he can have a necklace. Give her time." She's frightened of something, and she hasn't found a way to open up about it. They helped Trudy, and then worked their way around the camp, helping all the others get their wagons and goods secure to be floated across the river. When it was time for the noon meal, Penelope was glad she'd kept out what they had left of the meal she'd made the night before. It was only biscuits and gravy with jerky cut up in it, but Herb had really enjoyed it. He'd loved it so much the previous morning that she'd made it for supper as well. It was easy, and it pleased him, and those two things were the most important to Penelope. They ate from the same pot because Penelope had already secured the dishes, but it was still a good meal. "How's it going?" she asked Herb. "It's going much faster than expected, thanks to two women who walked around the whole camp helping others get their wagons secure. It's taking so many men to take wagons apart and float them across that there was no one to spare. If the wagons had come to us unsecured, we'd have to take the time to check each rope and make sure they were as they needed to be. Now, we're able to just float them." "Oh, good," Penelope said. "Mary and I tried to make sure everyone was ready to go as soon as they could be. You two did a great job." He ate his last bite and stood up. "Back to it. We have less than half of the wagons across so far, and if we want to finish today, that means a long day. But it also means we can probably get everything reassembled in the morning, and we can start out afternoon. I think we'll all feel safer as we get more and more land between us and Bradford." "No one has seen him today," Penelope said softly. "Mary and I have been watching and asking everyone." "Good. Keep your eyes peeled and make sure you have your pistol with you and ready." Herb kissed her forehead as he headed back to the task at hand. Penelope scrubbed her pot out down near the river, and as she was walking back toward camp, a hand clamped over her mouth, pulling her away from the others. "Don't make a sound. You hear me?" Penelope nodded, glad she was still wearing her apron. He would never guess she was armed, and she would just need to wait for the right moment to use her pistol. She was determined that it was all going to be fine, and she would see Herb again within a few hours. And then she started praying. Asterisk. Herb was working on getting one of the wheels off the Bedwell's wagon when Mary came up to him, looking frantic. "I haven't seen Penelope since lunchtime. I thought she was probably just taking care of necessities, and she'd be back at any moment, but she wasn't. It's been an hour." Herb stood up, his eyes wide. "An hour? And you're just now telling me?" He wanted to shake Mary, but that wasn't his place. No, his job now was to find his wife and find her fast. "I'm so sorry. I feel like I've fallen down on the job." He rubbed his hand over his face. "It's not your fault. With the chaos the camp is in today, it was the perfect time for him to make his move." Mary frowned. "What are we going to do?" "You're going to go back to camp and let the other women know that she's gone. She might still be somewhere in camp and you just don't realize it." Mary looked skeptical, but she hurried back toward the camp. As soon as she was gone, Herb called to the other men. "It looks like Penelope's been taken. I'm going to get one of her necklaces and try to negotiate with the man." "I'm going with you," Bob said, immediately moving to Herb's side. Malcolm nodded. "You may need a doctor." "We can't all go," Herb said. "Well, no more can really be done here without a blacksmith," Bedwell said, "so we may as well all go and see if we can find your lost wife." Behind Bedwell was a large splashing sound, and Herb turned to see a small girl go under the water. He couldn't tell who it was, and he knew someone had to take care of her, but he needed to get his wife. Penelope had to take precedence. There were others to help the girl. Bedwell was the first to jump into the water, and he went after the child. While he was taking care of the girl, and two others were helping him, Herb instructed men to go in every direction looking for Penelope. They had to find her. He barely noticed as the girl came out of the water, but Bedwell was nowhere to be seen. He'd find out what happened later. He ran to camp to get one of the necklaces while Bob saddled horses for them. He took one of his horses, and with Bob at his side, the doctor had to stay to help the girl. They were on their way. They rode back the way the company had come, east along the river. He knew Bradford would have Penelope on his horse with him, because he hadn't had another, and they should be able to overtake him quickly if this was the direction they'd gone. Asterisk. Penelope struggled on the horse, biting down hard on Mr. Bradford's filthy hand. As soon as he let go, she let out a loud scream she hoped would be heard. He stopped the horse and dismounted, dragging her off with him. "You're going to behave. I'm not having you fight me the whole way back to Virginia. The only way you'll get me to Virginia is to kill me first," she spat at him. "I'm not going back. Do you know what Reginald Black is like? I don't care what he's like. You're going to Virginia with me, and I'm taking you to your father, who better pay me extra for my troubles." "How did you hide so well?" "I'm married. They don't want me back," she said. "Reginald wants a woman as pure as the driven snow, and I'm not that any longer." "Then I guess it doesn't matter if I have a little fun with you along the way," he said, reaching for his belt buckle. Penelope had managed to free her hands from the ropes he'd tied around her wrists, and one hand immediately went into her apron pocket. "I don't think you're going to have any fun with me at all," she said calmly, pulling back the hammer. He stared at her. "You're bluffing. You can't possibly know how to use that thing. You're a soft Southern woman. You have me confused with someone else, Mr. Bradford. I assure you, all softness went out of me the day my father sold my best friend. You have two options right now. I can shoot you, which really would be my preference at this point, or you can make a deal with me. I'll give you a diamond necklace my father gave me when I first came out, and you'll go back to Virginia and tell my father I died. Either way, I win. If you take the necklace, then you can win with me." He looked surprised for a moment. "You may know how to shoot, but you wouldn't kill me." She aimed carefully for his shoulder as he rushed toward her and pulled the trigger. Her aim was true, and he grasped the spot where the bullet slammed into him and fell to the ground. "I shot you, but I didn't kill you. There's another bullet in this gun, and if you don't lie there quietly, I will use it." Penelope surprised even herself as she stood there over him with the gun pointed at him. She'd been unsure whether or not she could ever shoot anyone, but she hadn't hesitated. She didn't want to kill him, but she knew in that moment if she had to, she'd do it without hesitation. Bradford lay on the ground, clutching his shoulder. "Your father underestimated you. He always has." Asterisk. Herb heard a gunshot from up ahead and he spurred his horse to go faster. He could picture Penelope lying on the ground, and he had to get the image out of his head. Bob yelled at him. "Herb, stop. I can't. She may be hurt. She may be dead." He was frantic to get to his wife. He had to know she was all right. "You're not going to help either of you if you rush into this situation without thinking first. Stop for a minute." Herb knew his friend was right, and he pulled back on the reins, stopping the horse. "I don't know what I'm going to do if he killed her." "Okay, we can't both go barreling in from the same directly. Give me 5 minutes and I'll ride out wide, then come in at an angle. We're going to be sure she's all right." Bob looked at Herb. "Do you have a necklace?" "Yes, of course. I'm scared for my wife, but it hasn't turned me into an idiot." Bob nodded. "All right. Give me a little time, and we'll both start riding toward the gunshot in 5 minutes. All right?" Herb nodded his agreement and sat atop his horse, waiting as Bob moved into position. He was glad there was someone cool-headed with him because all he could think about was saving his wife. As he sat there, he tried to come up with the names they would give the children they would have when he found her, and she was safe. He knew it was a silly thing to do, but it kept his mind off his worries. Josephine, Ruby, Lillian, Dean, Roy, Linda, Vicky. He ran out of names as he sat in shock, thinking about what had happened. The woman he loved more than all others, more than he'd ever dreamed he could love anyone, had been taken from him and was lying on the ground, hurt. What if she was bleeding out as he sat there coming up with names for children they would never have? What if she couldn't survive, because he wasted so much time? But he knew Bob was right, and he'd only put her in more danger by rushing in, without at least thinking about it first. Surely it had been 5 minutes. It had to have been. He counted to 60, and then he started riding toward the sound of the gunshot. Toward his wife and his entire future. Toward the only woman he had ever loved. She had to be all right. He couldn't let himself dwell on the possibility of her being hurt or dead. He wouldn't be able to do what he needed to do, unless he was sure she was standing there with her pistol in her hand, so that's what he decided he was riding toward. Penelope was going to be found, and he was just going to her to give her a ride back to camp so they could continue their journey to Oregon. So, all could be perfect with their lives, and they could live happily ever after. She'd once told him that she dreamed of happily ever after, so that's what they were going to have. Someday they would be sitting in Oregon, in beautifully carved rocking chairs, and their grandchildren would be playing around them. And they would tell their grandchildren the story of going west on the Oregon Trail and how someone had kidnapped their grandmother. It was a story no one else would be telling their grandchildren, and he knew it would be true. Herb knew that his love was waiting for him, and he was going to find her. Chapter 10. Monday, June 8, Sup/Sup, 1852. It seems that the danger is gone. I feel like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. Mr. Bradford accepted our bribe of one of my necklaces to go back to Virginia and tell my father I'm dead. He will be recovering from the bullet wound I gave him along the way. It's true. I actually used my pistol on a human, and I saved myself when I was kidnapped. I never thought I could actually do it, but I did. I left Virginia in February, a young lady who had been sheltered from many things while at the same time experiencing the horrors of having a friend torn from her and killed. Now, I'm a strong independent woman. I didn't have to wait for Herb to save me, though he arrived shortly after I shot Mr. Bradford, and it did help that he had my necklace, but I still saved myself. In my story, the heroine saved herself and the hero rode in after she'd done so. I've always loved fairy tales, because the hero saves the heroine. Now, I will be able to teach my daughters that sometimes the heroine must save herself to get to her happily ever after. As I have done. Penelope looked up as she heard 2 horses riding toward her, but she never took the gun off Mr. Bradford. She wasn't going to let him get the upper hand again. When she saw Herb, she smiled. "It's nice of you to come and help me." Herb's grin was a mile wide as he dismounted and walked toward her. "Do not take your gun off him." "I wouldn't. He did say he would be amenable to our bribe. He'll take the necklace and go back to father and report my death on the trail." Herb stood beside Penelope, realizing that he could see Bob riding toward them. "You will?" Mr. Bradford nodded. "I need a doctor." It looks like she did a good job. Did the bullet go clean through, or is it lodged in there somewhere? Bradford's face went white. "I haven't checked." "Maybe I should do that for you," Herb said, liking the idea of probing the man's shoulder with the knife he carried. "No. Just get me to a doctor." Herb sighed. "How do you want this scum to tell your father you died, wife?" Penelope considered. "I could die of cholera, but that is such a dreadful disease. I don't want to die that way. I suppose I could drown, or be trampled by a herd of buffalo. You know what? I like that one. Tell father I was trampled by a herd of buffalo, all right, Mr. Bradford?" "Whatever you want, Miss Brainerd." Penelope glared at the injured man. My name is Mrs. Jensen. Yes, Mrs. Jensen. So sorry to forget. Bradford seemed afraid of Penelope, and Herb wanted to laugh. His southern belle of a wife had become a strong, pioneer woman, and he couldn't be prouder of her. Herb pulled a necklace from his shirt pocket. Will this one work? That one will work beautifully, Penelope said. Bradford's eyes widened. Are those real diamonds? He asked. Of course, they are. What do you take me for? Penelope asked. I'm offended you doubt the authenticity of my diamonds. I want to kick him now, Herb. May I kick him? Or do you want to do it? Herb laughed. Let's leave Bob here to watch over him and tell the doc how to find him. I want to get you back to camp. Where I'm safe? She asked, her eyes twinkling. I think we all underestimated you, Herb said, shaking his head. I always knew you were a strong woman, but you have outshone even my wildest expectations. You need to remember this, Penelope said. I can shoot now, and I don't want to have to use this pistol on you. Herb laughed, his arm going around his wife. I'm so proud of you. She grinned. I did it. I saved myself. I probably should have just let you handle things from the very beginning, he said. You should have. Penelope looked at Mr. Bradford. My friend Bob is going to keep a gun on you until the doctor gets here, but then you're on your own. Do you understand that? You're not coming back to camp to recover. You will be on your way, or I'll shoot you again. I will be on my way. Bradford yelped as the necklace hit his chest. Your father will believe you were trampled by a herd of buffalo. I swear it. Penelope handed Bob her gun. If he causes trouble, you'll need to shoot him again. He doesn't much care for being shot. I can't imagine why, Bob said, a huge grin on his face. Make sure Mary knows I'm all right, and I'll be back soon. And tell her what an amazing job she did teaching you to shoot. She smiled. I sure will. Bradford groaned. You mean a woman taught another woman to shoot? Don't you men know how to control the ladies around here? Bob laughed. My lady is impossible to control, and that's what I love best about her. Herb took Penelope's hand and led her back to his horse. Do you know how to ride? He asked. No, but I really want to learn. I think I want to be able to do anything you can do. I'm not going to teach you to blacksmith, but only because we only need one blacksmith in town. We need a dressmaker too. I guess that's true. She sighed happily. I did a good job, didn't I? You did. He mounted the horse and held a hand down for her. Step on my foot and swing up behind me. How? I don't have a side saddle. He chuckled. Lady, you just shot a man, threatened to kick him, and then told him you'd shoot him again if you saw him again. I think you can ride astride just this once. I suppose I can, but it's not nearly as ladylike. She did as he'd instructed, standing on his foot and swinging up behind him. She had to bunch her skirts up a little so she could sit astride, but she did it, and then she wrapped her arms around him. I'm so glad that's over. Herb nodded. You have no idea what went through my mind when I heard that gunshot. I'm sorry for the fright it must have given you, but I'm not sorry for the way it turned out. She frowned. Oh, no. Are all the wagons going to be able to cross today with you gone for so long? He chuckled. I don't think anyone is as worried about crossing that river as they are about you coming back to camp safe and sound. Really? She asked. I'm surprised. Oh, I just remembered one of the girls fell into the river just before I left to find you. They got her out, but I didn't see Bedwell before I left. Mr. Bedwell? She asked. What does he have to do with anything? Believe it or not, he saw her fall and jumped in after her. I think he got her out, but I'm not sure. There were hands there helping, and I was focused on finding you. Penelope blinked. So, I was saved, but Mr. Bedwell may have died? As much as she didn't like Bedwell, she felt bad that she had taken some of the men who could help save him away when he needed them. I don't know if he died or not. I really didn't take the time to see. I'll pray for him the whole way back to camp. Herb sighed. I heard how he treated you the day you both had supper with the Bentleys. Why are you praying for him? He wasn't sure he could bring himself to pray for Bedwell after how he treated Penelope. So, how could she? Because I was taught to pray for my enemies. And I don't think Mr. Bedwell is an enemy. He's just an angry, misguided man. He deserves a chance to be happy, don't you think? I guess everyone does. The whole way back he heard her mumbling her prayer. Sometimes she prayed for the little girl who fell into the water, sometimes for Bedwell, and he even heard Bradford's name mentioned a time or two. It made no sense to him that she was that concerned about people who had hurt her, and a little girl whose identity she didn't know, but it was who she was. A wonderful, sweet woman who cared about others more than she cared about herself. A girl who had left a life of ease so she could go west and never have anything to do with slavery. A woman whom he loved with everything inside him. The woman who he would have children with and spend the rest of his life loving. As soon as they got back to camp, they found the doctor, who had been ministering to Mr. Bedwell. He sucked too much water into his lungs, Dr. Bentley said. If he doesn't die from pneumonia, it'll be a miracle. Penelope noticed Katie standing beside the doctor. I'll watch over him. He saved my little girl. Penelope hurried to her friend. It was your daughter who fell into the river? She's all right? She put her arm around Katie, knowing she must have been frantic for the time her daughter was in the water. She is. Mr. Bedwell fished her out of the water, and then he was caught by the current and forced under. Some of the other men got him out, but we're not sure if he's going to be all right. He hasn't woken up yet. Herb frowned. Doc, I need you to go and see to the man Penelope shot. She got him in the shoulder. I'd say let's let him die, but he's going to go back to Virginia and tell her father that she's dead. I chose to die being trampled by a herd of buffalo, Penelope added. Katie smiled at her. I think that's a very good choice. You go quickly that way with no suffering. The doctor stood. Of course, I'll go with you, Herb. Let's get that man bandaged up, and then I can come back and sit with Bedwell. No need, Katie said. I'll stay for as long as I need to. Thank you, Dr. Bentley said, grabbing his medical bag and following Herb from camp. How can I help you, Katie? Penelope asked. After what you've been through, I don't think you should be asking me that. Well, I am. Could I get supper for your children? Katie frowned and nodded. Please. Maybe farm the children out to others so that I can keep caring for the man who risked his own life for my little girl. And his children. Don't forget someone needs to watch his boys. I won't, Penelope said as she hurried from the tent they'd set up for the sick man. When she got out, she did everything Katie had requested, and then she found some of the last money she had saved from the sale of one of her necklaces and bought a chicken from one of the other women in camp. I'm going to make some chicken soup, she said to herself, and immediately Margaret was beside her. I'll help you with the soup, and Jamie and I will watch over Katie's little girl while she helps Mr. Bedwell. Margaret shook her head. I never thought I'd say it, but I'm praying for him. He did something really good here, and I don't think he should be punished for it. Neither do I. I never thought we'd see good in Mr. Bedwell, but here we are, trying to save his life after he saved a little girl from drowning. Maybe there's good in him after all. There must be, because from the way I hear it, he just jumped in after the child, giving no thought to his own safety. He's not the man any of us thought he was. Penelope nodded, thinking about her own experience with the bitter man. I pray he's all right. Margaret looked at her. In thinking about the former captain, I forgot to ask how you got away. And I forgot to tell you. Penelope smiled. It's a good story. I'll be talking to my grandchildren about it someday. She briefly explained pulling the pistol and Mr. Bradford telling her she would never use it, and his shock when she had. I told him if he ever comes around our camp, I'd shoot him again, and he didn't seem to like that idea. Margaret laughed. I should say he didn't. I'm so glad you're fine. To me, it's more than being fine. 3 months ago, I was a Southern belle, engaged to a man my father chose, who I knew my life would be miserable with. Now I'm a strong woman who rescued herself from the man who kidnapped her. Even a week ago, I wouldn't have believed it was possible. That's a wonderful story. Now you have to know to teach your girls that sometimes the heroine doesn't have to wait for the hero. Sometimes she has to rescue herself. Margaret nodded. I do think I'll let you tell them the story the next time we move on. I have a feeling we might stay in place for a day or two to give Mr. Bedwell time to heal. After everything, I still want to call him the captain, and I have no idea why. I know what you mean. That's how we all first met him, and it seems inappropriate to call him anything else. Exactly, Margaret said. Margaret spent the next hour showing Penelope how to butcher and remove the feathers from a chicken prior to boiling it. As soon as the bird was in the pot, they gathered carrots and potatoes and seasoning to make the broth better. They were both surprised at the number of people who were willing to share some of their food for the soup. By the time they were done, there was a huge pot of soup roasting over a fire, and Penelope looked downriver, hoping to see Herb, Bob, and the doctor coming toward them. When they finally came into sight, she breathed a sigh of relief. They were all safe and it was truly over. Mr. Bradford was done searching for her, and as soon as he was done licking his wounds, he'd be off to Virginia to speak with her father. She was safe, and so were the people she loved. She ran to Herb and held on to him as he dismounted, pleased to have him back safely. Margaret and I are making a huge pot of soup, and that's what we're having for supper, she finally said as she pulled away. I'm not exactly worried about what our supper will be, he said, but his stomach chose that moment to growl, proving him a liar. Well, not too worried anyway. After they'd done the supper dishes and checked on the former captain once more, Herb said the words she loved to hear. Take a walk with me. Together, they left the camp and walked along the river. This will be our last night on this side of the river, he said. He pointed to the other side, where several of the families were already camped. Edna stood across the river and waved happily at them. Penelope waved back with a smile on her face. I like her, she said. Edna? She's strange, but I do believe she's going to be a wonderful mother someday. I think so too. As they walked, she thought about how she wanted to say what she had to tell him. Did just coming out with it work best, or should she lead into it so as not to stun him? I had a lot of time to think today. So, did I, he said softly. When I heard that gunshot, I was certain you were dead, and I was racing toward you, but Bob made me stop and think about what to do, and it really helped. I had to picture you alive so that I could keep going. So, I pictured us as an old married couple, with our grandchildren all around us. We talked to them about how their grandmother rescued herself. She smiled. I've had those same thoughts today, but I also had a more important thought. You did? What was more important than my future grandchildren? He asked. She laughed. I realized as I was waiting for you to come get me, and I never had a moment's doubt that you would, that I love you. With everything inside me. You are the man I'd waited my whole life to have God bring to me, and here you are. I don't know why I didn't realize it until today. I guess I was just so blind, thinking about the danger. He spun her toward him and kissed her deeply. I love you right back, Penelope. I've wanted to tell you for such a long time, but I didn't want to scare you away. I know you married me simply because of the danger you were in, but that's not why I married you. I married you because from the first time I heard your southern drawl, I knew that I needed to have you in my life for the rest of my days. You are the one I want to grow old with. The one I want to make memories with. The one I want to love forever. Penelope noticed Katie standing beside the doctor. I'll watch over him. He saved my little girl. Penelope hurried to her friend. It was your daughter who fell into the river? She's all right? She put her arm around Katie, knowing she must have been frantic for the time her daughter was in the water. She is. Mr. Bedwell fished her out of the water, and then he was caught by the current and forced under. Some of the other men got him out, but we're not sure if he's going to be all right. He hasn't woken up yet. Herb frowned. Doc, I need you to go and see to the man Penelope shot. She got him in the shoulder. I'd say let's let him die, but he's going to go back to Virginia and tell her father that she's dead. I chose to die being trampled by a herd of buffalo, Penelope added. Katie smiled at her. I think that's a very good choice. You go quickly that way with no suffering. The doctor stood. Of course, I'll go with you, Herb. Let's get that man bandaged up, and then I can come back and sit with Bedwell. No need, Katie said. I'll stay for as long as I need to. Thank you, Dr. Bentley said, grabbing his medical bag and following Herb from camp. How can I help you, Katie? Penelope asked. After what you've been through, I don't think you should be asking me that. Well, I am. Could I get supper for your children? Katie frowned and nodded. Please. Maybe farm the children out to others so that I can keep caring for the man who risked his own life for my little girl. And his children. Don't forget someone needs to watch his boys. I won't, Penelope said as she hurried from the tent they'd set up for the sick man. When she got out, she did everything Katie had requested, and then she found some of the last money she had saved from the sale of one of her necklaces and bought a chicken from one of the other women in camp. I'm going to make some chicken soup, she said to herself, and immediately Margaret was beside her. I'll help you with the soup, and Jamie and I will watch over Katie's little girl while she helps Mr. Bedwell. Margaret shook her head. I never thought I'd say it, but I'm praying for him. He did something really good here, and I don't think he should be punished for it. Neither do I. I never thought we'd see good in Mr. Bedwell, but here we are, trying to save his life after he saved a little girl from drowning. Maybe there's good in him after all. There must be, because from the way I hear it, he just jumped in after the child, giving no thought to his own safety. He's not the man any of us thought he was. Penelope nodded, thinking about her own experience with the bitter man. I pray he's all right. Margaret looked at her. In thinking about the former captain, I forgot to ask how you got away. And I forgot to tell you. Penelope smiled. It's a good story. I'll be talking to my grandchildren about it someday. She briefly explained pulling the pistol and Mr. Bradford telling her she would never use it, and his shock when she had. I told him if he ever comes around our camp, I'd shoot him again, and he didn't seem to like that idea. Margaret laughed. I should say he didn't. I'm so glad you're fine. To me, it's more than being fine. 3 months ago, I was a Southern belle, engaged to a man my father chose, who I knew my life would be miserable with. Now I'm a strong woman who rescued herself from the man who kidnapped her. Even a week ago, I wouldn't have believed it was possible. That's a wonderful story. Now you have to know to teach your girls that sometimes the heroine doesn't have to wait for the hero. Sometimes she has to rescue herself. Margaret nodded. I do think I'll let you tell them the story the next time we move on. I have a feeling we might stay in place for a day or two to give Mr. Bedwell time to heal. After everything, I still want to call him the captain, and I have no idea why. I know what you mean. That's how we all first met him, and it seems inappropriate to call him anything else. Exactly, Margaret said. Margaret spent the next hour showing Penelope how to butcher and remove the feathers from a chicken prior to boiling it. As soon as the bird was in the pot, they gathered carrots and potatoes and seasoning to make the broth better. They were both surprised at the number of people who were willing to share some of their food for the soup. By the time they were done, there was a huge pot of soup roasting over a fire, and Penelope looked downriver, hoping to see Herb, Bob, and the doctor coming toward them. She smiled up at him. I'm almost glad for the crazy week of danger I was in, because I don't know if I'd have been able to see past my nose to the most wonderful man in the world without that prompting. I think I must have been blind. He hugged her close. You're my everything, Penelope. I hope you know that I wouldn't trade a minute with you for all the riches in the world, though I now feel like we have all the riches in the world with the jewelry you have hidden in a flour sack of all places. She laughed. I had some friends whose husbands sold their jewelry as soon as they married, and I didn't want you to be tempted. Oh, I wasn't tempted. Not at all. But now I know that we can give beautiful jewelry to our daughters. Or we can sell them and build a blacksmith shop and a dress shop. Maybe we could have them next to each other, and you could come to the shop and eat with me at noon. He smiled. I like the thought of that. What about when the children come? Where will they be while you're at the dress shop? Maybe we could find a former slave to come and we'll pay her to watch them. I don't know. We'll worry about that when the time comes. Yes, we will. For now, let's just worry about how much we love each other, and how we're going to finish crossing that river. She sighed. And whether or not the captain will survive. The former captain, Herb said, frowning. I hate to think of him lying there so ill. So, do I, but I think if he was going to get sick, he did it for all the right reasons. Maybe there's good in him after all. We may never have known without that danger today. No, we wouldn't have. She rested her head on his shoulder. We're going to make it to Oregon and have those children, aren't we? Did you doubt it? Not for a minute.